I feel humbled to be here today, sharing the stage with people who have teed up this topic of environmental destruction so beautifully already, and how we can respond. 4 years ago, I was sitting in your seat in Fort Benning, Georgia, the Ignatian Family Teaching for Justice, and it's an honor to share a little bit of my journey here. Speak on energy and organizing. First of all, does anybody have a favorite Jesuit? Well, good, because I have a favorite Jesuit too, and I'm going to tell you about him. His name is Dean Bradford. Called to discernment in troubled times. And that book for me has really been a guidebook for discerning something we talk a lot about in the Asian tradition, our consolations and desolations, and understanding those in the context of the war, poverty, environmental destruction we've heard about already. For me, as I reflect on my own consolations over the years, what I've been drawn to most is energy and organizing. When I was a freshman, I sat in an engineering classroom with about 300 students, and our professor put up on the screen a slide that says, the top 10 challenges for humanity in the next 50 years. And the number one was something that surprised me. She said it was energy. Up there was war, poverty, democracy, disease, so many things that we first come to mind, but I didn't realize why energy was number one. And as she was going on explaining, I realized it's so connected to everybody on Earth. Energy's a cause of so much waste. It's a cause of so much environmental destruction in the mountaintops of Appalachia. And our consumption of energy has implications that reach the whole world in terms of emissions that come from energy. I realize it's connected as the air we breathe, as the water we drink, as the food we eat. Energy is something we all share, we all consume, we all need for life. And as I kind of, in my freshman year, began wrestling with questions of energy, I realized, how do we provide sustainably for all the Earth's people? And as Ignatius, or as anybody might ask, how do we do this in light of the Gospels? And that began my own kind of questioning and discerning. So I want to share a story about a formative experience I had in El Salvador, which really alerted me to a different question of energy. In addition to being informed by the witnesses of the church women we heard speaking about this morning about Romero and Yuka, I spent the summer accompanying a family, living with a family, a host family, Roberto Maria and my brother Lito Piano in Guajira, Chalatenango. And Roberto Maria, welcomed me in the home. Just as I'm sure many of you have been welcomed into people's homes. And what surprised me was, they just had 2 rooms, and in each room was just one light bulb in each room, and a small 10-inch TV, and that was basically the only energy they consumed on a regular basis, other than the wood for the stove that they used to cook. And I noticed those things, but I didn't really hit me what that meant until I returned home, and realized how much I had taken all the lights I turned on for granted, and all the energy I consumed for granted, and just the disconnect of how much energy I consumed compared to Roberto Maria, and compared to the over 1.2 billion people on Earth who have never flipped a light switch. And just that consciousness helped me realize we can be in solidarity with those who don't have the access we do, just by being conscious every time we reach for the light switch or turn on our computers, or any time we use energy. And I started making a practice myself to not consume energy at certain times, to try to conserve as much energy as I could as an act of solidarity with those who don't have the access to energy that we do. But then I also realized it wasn't enough just to have small practices, individual practices. That was an important part of my consciousness, but social change was a bigger issue that I wanted to start wrestling with in energy. And think about big questions of the future. So I started working at Cambridge Energy Research Associates when I graduated from college. And my role there was a researcher on climate change and clean energy issues. And I was basically tasked with helping executives and strategic planners of big oil and power companies think about what does it mean for their industry, what does it mean for their companies' climate change legislation, what is that going to do to their future? And what's surprising is they know climate change is real. They know that we're going to have to transition from our polluting sources of energy to renewable sources in the future. They're well aware of this. That they have all the power in how quickly we transition. Right now, they are the decision makers that are making all the decisions. They're organized in big, powerful associations here in Washington, one of the American Petroleum Institute. I remember visiting, and you can ask them about what they're going to do with oil in the future. And they're like, we're going to keep consuming it. We're going to keep finding new sources of oil. And how are we going to make that clean? Well, we'll get to that when it's there. Their timelines aren't the timelines that I think we realize the destruction of our planet is calling us to respond to in a more quick way. For the most part, we pay our energy bills, we fill up our gas tanks, and I don't think we pay attention to energy and how it's connected until there's a tragedy like in the Gulf. And when the Gulf oil spill began, I was at a lunch welcoming a new colleague to our organization. I was at this fancy lunch table with white coffee napkins under a chandelier, and we were welcoming a new colleague who was a former BP executive actually. And at that lunchtime conversation, we were asking, what's going to be the outcome of all this? What's the implication of this 200 billion gallons spilling into the ocean? What are we going to do? And as we started talking about it, it's going to be an issue for public relations for a little while, and we're going to have some challenges. But good news is Brazil has this great offshore technology. Offshore reserves or technology is working fine. I think the biggest implication is going to be insurance costs are going to go up for offshore rigs. And I remember just walking away from that lunch and realizing, if that's the only implication of the Gulf oil spill, something's wrong. Something's badly wrong. And it's because I think the decision makers on energy today aren't all of us. I think it's and my sister Helen said yesterday, I was a sleeper and I realized I woke up then. And I think for all of us, I think this is a wake-up call, this tragedy in the Gulf. I think it's something we can't be neutral anymore. So I decided to leave Syria shortly after and decided I needed to do something about this. I need to start building my own skills of how we can respond, how we can organize and mobilize together to do something much bigger, to have a powerful voice to say, no, it's not just about insurance costs, it's about stopping consuming oil. It's about finding alternatives. It's about creating a new culture, generating a new economy that can be green and sustainable for the future. So, and as soon as I realized I wasn't alone. I realized there's hundreds and thousands of other kids out there doing things just like we're trying to do today. I ended up joining up with 5 people here in DC who recognize the unemployment situation in parts of DC is 35%. And they said, these folks have been looking for jobs, and there's hard jobs right now in this economy. And they also realized this other part of DC, up here, we're in Georgetown, lots of big, old, inefficient homes that are just spewing wasted energy because they're not weatherized. And they realized we could connect these two parts of the community. We could start really linking and rebuilding the community, one that's been torn by segregation and race for so long, by creating jobs for them, by getting people to weatherize their home. And so we've embarked on this campaign for a year now, and I just joined a couple months ago. But it's having big successes. We've weatherized 200 homes, created 6 jobs. Just last week, 2 people said, or 2 of our contractor companies working with said we were ready to hire 2 more weatherization technicians bring on. And this is a timely solution that we're finding. And I think we're at a really critical junction in time. There's organizations like the DC Project we work for now. There's organizations like that in all of our communities that are taking in the signs of the times, the realities we're in, but also reinvesting where we are, trying to rebuild our urban centers and connect some of the issues. I think the environment and energy present an opportunity for us all. an opportunity to work on justice issues in a new way, and in a way that I think our generation is also very aware of and very, very passionate about. And I think there's a lot of hope in that, because I think we have a lot of creativity in how we can respond to these issues. And I think the challenge for our generation is to respond creatively. And I think there's a lot of hope. When I was hearing Matt speak a little bit about his experiences in high school, I would call my own experience when I was in college. I came back from a similar trip in Appalachia and was with two other of my friends, and we were talking about what we do on campus. And I come from the school of Notre Dame, and there's something big happening on Saturdays there in football. And people produce a lot of aluminum. One of the first things we were thinking, what if we recycled all that aluminum? And so we got some friends together, we started carrying bags around while people were tailgating, and I realized before we knew it, we were getting 20 students to show up on Saturday, and 50, and 70. By the end of the season, we had recycled 2 tons of aluminum. And that was just the beginning. But the point is, we started small. I think we started small. And after the football season was over, we said, what can we do this Christmas? And that beginning, we said, what if we try to reduce our energy consumption? And we started having competition between dorms. How much can you reduce your consumption? How much can we reduce? And we ended up getting the power plant to participate as well. We had a blackout. They tried to turn off lights on campus for a whole hour, trying to go out to reduce our consumption of energy and how much energy we consume, using that money to reinvest to make our buildings more efficient. And by the time we left, I left Notre Dame, there was a whole organization that was built. It was Green and Me. Started with the three of us to start the recycling program initially. And I think it just goes to show how things build. And the executive vice president at my graduation, at the meeting, he said, I want to start a $2 million loan fund and to have other students have access to the money they need to make the projects that they want to happen. I think it's not too much to ask all of our university and college and high school graduates to make investments in our own buildings. I think there's just a lot of hope in doing those kind of things. But also another source of hope for us is that as dirty as coal is, as toxic and awful as it is, I think we need to move beyond coal. And one sign of hope there is there's a Sierra Club campaign called Beyond Coal that has been very effective in the past 10 years. Does anybody know how many proposed coal plants there's been in the United States in the past decade? Venture a guess anyway? 100. It's about 120 proposed plants. That's how many new plants were planned to be built just in the past few years. Fortunately, this group of Sierra Club lawyers has organized every one of those 120 plants. They've been present there fighting the air permits, so they can't actually get permits to actually start building plants. And what we've got excited about is 114 of those have been defeated. 114. Those are just the environmental lawyers. I think all of us, our challenge is the 400 existing coal plants that still operate in the United States today. I think that's our challenge. I think that's what I invite you here to think about how you can start fighting coal campaigns in all of your campuses and all of your cities. There's a big gathering coming up in April called Power Shift, organized by Energy Action Coalition, who I think this presentation you might have heard from. I share an office with the Energy Action Coalition, so I'm helping organize this year's Power Shift, April 1st through 4th. We should think about coming back to DC to learn and to bring not just people you're sitting next to, but 5 or 6 other students with you as well, to really think about how as a team you can go back to your own campuses to think about building campaigns to be part of this broader Beyond Coal campaign, Move Our Country Beyond Coal. And I think there's also a sign of hope in the sun. The amount of solar energy that hits the Earth in 1 second is equivalent to the total amount of energy humanity consumes in a year. That's the potential. That's the abundance of God's grace. That's the abundance of our potential of energy. So I just want to say solar energy isn't a question of just for history. I think it's also a spiritual question. How are each of us capturing the light? How do we follow what moves us, the sustaining energy? As Sister Helen and as Dean Brackley said yesterday, I think we own spiritual practices to ground us in the sustaining energy for the struggle. And I think the challenges facing our world and challenges determining our energy future, Those are an invitation to offer our own gifts as part of the solution. And I want to invite Casey up here just to share a quick poem about how each day we can be one more in this fight.
It is good that we are here. Amen. And part of what's challenging is that we have to go back home. We don't get to just stay in this room amongst this community. And I know my own experience is that I get all fired up and ready to go. And sometimes I reach a saturation point where you keep learning all the facts, and you wake up from being asleep, and then you want to crawl back into bed and not get out again. So one of the things that keeps me going in a commitment to be married and in a desire to live a prophetic witness in our marriage, and also in my work as a community organizer, is the Word in Scripture and also in poetry. So this is a poem called The Low Road by Margie Piercy. And I hope it can be a little tidbit that nourishes you as you think about going back home. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers. They can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child, wall up your lover. They can do anything you can't blame them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight. You can refuse. You can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting, back to back, can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000 power and your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. And each day you need one more. Thank you.